There are thoughts that escape the moment they arrive, lost in the fog of distraction. But then there are thoughts that do the opposite. They arrive like a whisper and remain like an echo that resonates eternally in the quiet spaces of your mind. You try to get them out of your head, ignore them, sleep to forget them, but they come back stronger, sharper, more disturbing each time. They are not just questions. They are disguised paradoxes of the kind that open doors in your mind that you didn't know were there, and once opened, they never close completely. This is a collection of thoughts that you can't stop thinking once you've heard them, each of them designed not to answer, but to awaken, to plant a seed that grows in the corners of your consciousness when you are awake at 3 a.m., looking at the ceiling, wondering if anything was ever what it seemed. So get comfortable, because once we start, there's no way to forget where we're going. There is something disturbing about looking in a mirror, not for what it shows, but for what it does not forget. Imagine a mirror that remembers every version of you that has stood before it. Not just the person you are now, but every fleeting expression, every hidden crisis, every fake smile, every whisper rehearsed before an interview or an apology. Imagine that mirror silently storing every version of you as layers stacked upon layers, watching without judging, without the courtesy of forgetting. But here's the twist. You have changed, haven't you? You have cut your hair, you have hardened your heart, you have learned to pretend better, and yet this mirror remembers the child who stood in front of it with toothpaste on his chin, remembers the version of you that doubted everything, the one that rehearsed saying, "I'm fine," so many times that it started to sound convincing. Now imagine you look at that mirror again. What do you really see? Do you only see your reflection, or do you see a projection built on every previous moment it has captured? Could it be that what you are seeing is not the present, but a disturbing composite of your past selves sewn together by a silent memory? This paradox asks, if a mirror could remember everything, would your reflection still feel like you, or would it become something strange, something more true than your own memory? This is where it gets uncomfortable. We often forget ourselves, we rewrite our past, we bend memories to survive, we omit the parts we are ashamed of, but the mirror would not. The mirror would remember the fight you pretended didn't happen, the tears you quickly dried the moment you looked at yourself, and you didn't recognize who you had become. It's not about supernatural terror. It's about the psychological unease of knowing that something could preserve the truths you choose to forget, and this is where your mind begins to spiral. What if your reflection subtly changes, not to show who you are now, but to remind you who you used to be? What if that distant sadness in your eyes is not your current one, but the ghost of a moment when it was? Seeing a mirror that remembers forces us to face a chilling thought. Maybe we are not who we think we are. Maybe we are just echoes of ourselves, constantly watched by the only witness who never forgets. The reflection becomes less of a feedback loop and more of a frozen archive, a silent observer of your psychological evolution. You stare at it, and it doesn't just reflect light, it reflects time, emotion, regret, change. So the next time you're alone in front of a mirror, ask yourself this: what version of yourself is looking at you? And more importantly, does it remember something that you have forgotten? Have you ever remembered something so vividly that it seemed real, only to realize later that it never really happened? A house you would swear you had visited, a conversation you can quote word for word, a face that looks familiar even though you have never seen that person. The memory is detailed, specific, conveys emotion, and yet it does not belong to you. Welcome to the paradox of memories you never had. It's not just a mental glitch or a case of déjà vu. It's something deeper, stranger. Imagine a memory that exists in your mind, fully formed, without a known origin. Where did it come from? Why does it feel more real than part of your real past? Is it something your brain invented, or is it something it received? What if your mind is not just a recorder of your experiences, but also a receiver tuned to the collective noise of human thoughts, traumas, and dreams? There are disturbing theories that suggest memory is not fully linked to individual consciousness, that sometimes we can capture fragments of other lives, other timelines, even other selves, not as complete downloads, but as impressions, flashes, shadows that dress in the suit of memory. It gets scarier when you realize that it doesn't seem like a mistake, but something intentional, as if your mind needed that memory for something, as if it had settled in with a purpose. We begin to wonder if this borrowed memory is a warning, a reminder, a remnant of a version of you that did not survive. Maybe you dream of drowning, but you have never been near the ocean. Maybe you feel the loss of someone you have never met. Maybe you can imagine a city you have never visited, down to the sound of its streets. Why does your brain simply make it up, or is there something that seeps through time, space, or the cracks in your own identity? And if a memory doesn't belong to you, how many others could also be imposters? Think about how much of your identity is based on memory. Your decisions, beliefs, fears, all supported by what you remember. But if only one memory is false, the structure begins to falter. You're no longer the person who went through those experiences. You're someone who believes they lived them. The paradox is even deeper. If a false memory shapes your true self, is it really false? Let's say a memory made you kind, or closed you off, or taught you to protect yourself. Even if it never happened, its effect did. What matters more, the truth of the event or the truth of its impact? The memory you never had is not less powerful than the ones you trust. And maybe, just maybe, the mind doesn't care if it's true or not. It only cares if it's useful, if it helps you survive, evolve, or cope. Or maybe the mind doesn't care, and you're just a passenger within a constantly changing narrative that reconstructs itself from moments both real and imagined. So the next time a strange memory passes through your mind, don't be so quick to dismiss it. Ask yourself instead who this memory belongs to and why it chose me. There's a space inside your mind that you have probably never noticed, not the thoughts themselves, but the spaces between them, the stillness that lives between the noise, the silence between your thoughts. At first glance, silence seems empty, devoid of meaning, just the absence of thought. But stay there for a moment, and something disturbing begins to unfold. Silence is not a void. It is watching in the milliseconds between your thoughts. You're not thinking, nor speaking, nor imagining, but you're still there. What is that space, and who or what is experiencing it? You may think that your thoughts define you, that if you strip them away, you would be nothing, but silence reveals the opposite. You are still there. You are still there, even when there are no thoughts present, which leads to a disturbing question. If you exist without thoughts, are you the thinker or are you something that witnesses thought? This space is terrifying because it has no content. You cannot understand it nor narrate it. The moment you try to describe it, you think again, moving away from it. It is like trying to look into your own eyes without a mirror, and yet this silence is more you than the thoughts themselves. Thoughts come and go. They contradict each other. They're often involuntary. You don't choose to think. Thought just happens, but the silence is always there, waiting, immutable, a hidden constant under your mental storm. Some say that this space is where consciousness lives. Others say that it is where the illusion of self begins to dissolve, that in that silence the you that you think you are disappears, and something much more mysterious remains. But here is the paradox. This silence seems to contain you, but you can never really enter it. Every time you realize it is there, it disappears. The observer interrupts what he tries to observe. You chase the silence, but the moment you say, "There it is," the silence is gone, replaced by the thought of silence. It is a space that cannot be filled, yet contains everything. What if this emptiness, this in-between, is the true source of consciousness? What if all your identity is just static superimposed on it, like noise that interrupts an old signal? We fill our lives with sound, distractions, internal comments, but sometimes late at night, when the world is silent and your thoughts begin to slow, silence creeps in, and in that brief instant, you perceive something profound. You're not your thoughts, you are the space through which they pass, and once you glimpse it, you can no longer stop seeing it. You begin to notice the silence more often between the words of a conversation, between breaths, in the pause after a question. It is always there, subtle, disturbing, infinite. Perhaps that is why most people are afraid of silence. It is not the stillness that scares them. It is the confrontation with something deeper, something shapeless, something that does not follow the rules of identity, something that remembers when you forget who you are. So the next time your mind goes silent, do not rush to fill the void. Listen to the silence between your thoughts, not with your ears, but with your consciousness. Because what you find there may be nothing, it may be the only real thing. There's a version of you that exists just below the surface, not hidden from others, but hidden from yourself. You glimpse it in moments of weakness, flashes of emotion, or sudden impulses that you pretend never happened. You deny this version. You repress it. You eliminate it from your narrative, but deep down you know is still there. This is the paradox of the person you pretend not to be. Most of us build an identity from preferences, habits, beliefs, a polished self that we present to the world. We say that this is what we are, but who decided that? And what had to be buried to maintain that version of the story? Perhaps you pretend not to be cruel even though you have enjoyed someone's downfall. Perhaps you pretend not to be afraid, even though fear drives your actions more than you admit. Perhaps you act confidently, but secretly you are full of self-doubt. Or perhaps you present yourself as moral, knowing very well that your choices have not always been aligned with your ethics. This hidden version of yourself is inconvenient. It threatens the image that you have worked so hard to project, so you lock it up. But here's the paradox. The more you deny it, the more power it gains, because repression is not elimination. It is storage, and stored cells have a way of leaking out. They appear in dreams, in slips, in moments of anger or stress or silence. And when they do, they feel alien, as if someone else had taken control. But it was not like that. It was you, the part that you pretend is not. The real question is, which version is more authentic? Is it the self that you build and care for, or the one that emerges when you let your guard down? And if the one you hide keeps appearing, maybe it is not hiding at all. Maybe you just refuse to look. The mind is an expert at building false compartments. You put the bad self in one box and the good self in another, but over time those lines blur. What if your cruelty was born from pain? What if your jealousy hid a longing for connection? What if your lies were a way to survive when you face this hidden version not with shame, but with curiosity? Something strange happens. It begins to dissolve, not because it has been defeated, but because it has been understood. You begin to realize that this part of you is not your enemy. It is your mirror, and here is the final twist. The person you pretend not to be could actually be the most honest part of you. It is the one that tells the truth when you're tired of pretending, the one that cries when no one is watching, the one that says what everyone thinks but does not dare to say out loud, the one that dares to feel, even when it is ugly, that self is not a mistake. It is a message, a whisper under the mask that says, I am still here, I have always been here. So ask yourself who you are when no one is watching you, and, more importantly, why are you hiding it? Because if that person has even a shred of truth, you will never be complete until you stop pretending that it does not exist. What existed in the moment before you were born, not your memories, not your body, not your name, not even your history. The moment before your existence is a silence so complete that it resists description, and yet it happened. Or did it not? This is the paradox of the moment before you were born, a time that must have existed, but to which you will never be able to access, imagine, or remember, a moment that had to be real for you to exist, and yet from your perspective it is more unknown than death. Death, at least, is imagined in contrast to life. We think of endings because we have seen beginnings, but what was there before you? Not only before your thoughts, but before your being. Some say it is nothing, but nothing is not a blank space or darkness. It is not silence, not even stillness. It is a concept that we try to paint with words, but all language crumbles before it. You are not asleep. You are not waiting. You did not exist, even in not exist, and yet here you are. So what bridge did you cross? Did consciousness flicker in the universe of nothingness, or were you always part of something scattered like stardust before becoming self? Here is where it gets stranger. If you were never aware of the moment before your birth, what separates it from the moment after your death? If time for you began with your first breath, is your personal universe as old as your consciousness? Is the Big Bang real if you were not there to witness it? Or did existence somehow strangely begin when you began to perceive it? And what about all the things that happened before you arrived, the wars fought, the people who loved, the galaxies that rotated? Did they really happen to you, or are they just stories transmitted and reconstructed in your brain? You remember your childhood, you imagine your future, but the moment before birth remains a blind spot so vast that it could not exist, and yet it is the foundation on which everything you are is built. So here's a question that unravels even the most sensible mind. If you can never touch that moment and never know that time, what part of you really began? Was there a clean start, or are you simply a continuation of something eternal that occasionally forgets what it is because maybe you were not created at that moment, maybe you were just revealed, and in that case, birth was not the beginning, it was the memory, a memory, so total that it felt new. The paradox stands firm. The moment before you were born is not empty. It is full of questions that you still ask yourself. And perhaps the moment before any beginning is not about what comes after, but about the space that makes becoming possible. So the next time you wonder who you are, pause and look back, not at your past, but at that impossible moment behind you. That one without memory, without thought, without self, but that somehow brought you here. And in that silent mystery, perhaps you will find a soft echo of a truth too great to name. Have you ever heard yourself speak? And have you realized that it did not sound like you? There's a voice inside your head, the one that you use silently to think, reason, rehearse conversations, and narrate your own life. But where does it come from? Who does it really belong to? This is the paradox of a voice that is not yours. You assume that, since you hear it in your own mind, it must be an authentic expression of your identity. But think about it. That voice, the tone it adopts, the words it chooses, and the language it speaks have been shaped by forces beyond your control. The words of your parents, the criticisms of a teacher, the offhand comment of a friend, the expectations of a culture. All of them have been superimposed on the architecture of your thoughts to form something that sounds like you, but that may not really be you. It is disturbing to consider that what you call your inner monologue may be an echo chamber of other people's ideas, a borrowed voice, inherited and sown from fragments of influences that you did not choose. You did not choose the language in which you think. You did not design the phrases your brain relies on when you are under stress. You did not even consciously shape your deepest fears. They were given to you, whispered through the cracks of growth. And yet now they speak with your voice, even stranger. You often argue with this voice, correct it, feel hurt by it, and try ignoring it. What does that say about you? If the voice is yours, why do you disagree with it so often? If it is not yours, then who are you listening to exactly? It is like living with a narrator who is unreliable but intimately familiar. One moment it comforts you, the next it questions your worth, and somehow you accept this voice as part of your identity. But maybe it is not. Maybe it is a program that runs silently, repeating old beliefs that no longer fit with the person you are becoming. There is something deeply existential in realizing that the self that thinks may not be the self that chooses, that your thoughts can betray you, that your voice can lie. And here's the real twist. If you can observe the voice in your head, if you can hear it, then who is the one who listens? Is not that awareness the truest you, the calm presence behind the noise? Maybe the voice is not the self. Maybe it is just an instrument that the self sometimes misuses. Maybe your thoughts are not facts. Maybe your voice is not the truth. Maybe the most honest part of you is the part that simply observes, because if your voice can be shaped by the world, then it can also be reshaped. If it is only a pattern, it can be rewritten, and in that quiet understanding is the beginning of freedom. You are not your thoughts, you are who hears them. So the next time that voice whispers something to you that makes you feel small, pause and ask yourself whose voice that really is, and then listen more deeply, not to the noise, but to the stillness beneath, that stillness, that awareness that is you. There are places in your mind that you have never seen, but somehow they are familiar to you. A staircase that leads nowhere, a corridor bathed in blue light, the horizon of a city under two moons. You wake up knowing the texture of its walls, the aroma of its air, the path of a door that you have never touched. And the strangest thing is that it seems more real than some places where you have been. This is the paradox of the place that you have only dreamed of. You have not created it consciously. It has not been planted by memory, and yet it exists, vivid, structured, sometimes recurring in the labyrinth of your mind. It obeys rules. It has gravity, climate, rhythm, a logic that makes no sense and yet feels intuitively right. How is it possible to long for a place that you have never visited? Dreams are supposed to be fleeting nonsense sown by a sleeping brain, but some places feel more than symbolic. They feel anchored, revisited over the years, rebuilt with surprising details, not random, but remembered. So where do these dreamlike places come from? One theory suggests that they are fragments composed of images, emotions, and half-forgotten memories, rearranged by the subconscious, but that does not explain the impossible geography, the multi-layered architecture, the cities built with symbols that have never existed in real life. Another theory goes further and proposes that your mind may be tuning into frequencies, realities, or dimensions that exist beyond our perception, that dreams are not hallucinations, but glimpses through a crack in the wall, places that we can only access when consciousness loosens its control. That idea invites a chilling question. What if those places are real but unattainable? You remember them as nostalgia, without an origin, a sense of belonging to something you can never return to. And what does that say about identity if your heart longs for a land you have never touched? Does that make it less meaningful or more? And this is where the paradox deepens. Imagine waking up one day and you enter one of those dream places where you recognize every corner, every detail exactly as it appeared in your dream. Would you trust it? Would you accept it as real, or would you wonder if you are awake and if you will never leave, if your mind chooses the dream instead of the real world? What does that mean for your sense of truth? Perhaps these places represent more than environments. Maybe they are emotional landscapes, symbols of who you could have been or who you once were in a version of reality that you have forgotten. Maybe the longing is not for a place, but for a self free of rules, a self that remembers something that this life forced you to forget. So the next time you wake up, in that half second of stillness before the alarm goes off, before your name returns, pay attention, listen to the architecture of that place, walk its streets, feel its impossible familiarity. It may not be real, but it is not random either, and sometimes the places you have only dreamed of are the ones that know you best. Have you ever felt something so specific, so penetrating, that no word could describe it? A sensation that lives somewhere between nostalgia and awe, between warmth and loss, a feeling without a label, without shape, without a name? That is the paradox of the nameless feeling. We live in a world obsessed with definitions. Emotions are classified, diagnosed, and dissected into lists. Happiness, sadness, anger, fear. But what happens when what you feel does not fit into any of those categories? When it hovers on the edge of language like a ghost that you can perceive but never see? Some cultures have words for emotions that we do not name. Saudades in Portuguese, a deep longing for something that may never return. Mono no aware in Japanese, the gentle sadness of impermanence. Hiraeth in Welsh, a longing for a home that may never have existed. But even those words fall short before this paradox, because sometimes the feeling is so exclusively yours that no word could describe it. It is not just emotion. It is memory, imagination, instinct interwoven in a single flash that disappears the moment you try to capture it. Where does it come from? Perhaps it is the residue of forgotten experiences, past lives that resonate in the nervous system, leaving behind fragments that we do not recognize but still feel. Or perhaps it is the emotional version of déjà vu, not remembering a place, but remembering a state of being that your conscious mind has never experienced. And here is the strange twist. The moment you try to explain the feeling, it slips through your fingers as if you were trying to describe a color that no one has ever seen. Words flatten it, reduce it, so you remain silent. You carry it with you as a secret that no one else could understand, not because they do not want to, but because they simply cannot. This feeling becomes a kind of hidden language between you and yourself. And yet, paradoxically, it connects us because although our nameless feelings are different, the experience of having them, The pain of knowing that something indescribable lies within you is universal. We all walk around with emotional ghosts that have not yet found a voice. Maybe that is why art, music, cinema, poetry exists, not to label emotions, but to give them a shape, a mirror for the feelings that language has failed to capture. You see a painting or listen to a song and think, yes, that is it. Not because it has given you a word, but because it has recognized you. And yet, the question persists. If a feeling has no name, is it less real or more? Does naming something give it power or take it away? Is the mystery itself part of what makes these nameless feelings feel more alive, more sacred? Perhaps they are not meant to be resolved. Perhaps they are reminders that not everything that makes us human can or should be defined. So the next time you feel something that refuses to be named, do not rush to silence it. Do not force it into a box where it does not belong. Sit with it. Let it live. Let it teach you something that language never could. Some feelings were never meant to be understood, only to be felt. And that is what makes them unforgettable. There's a strange weight in the decisions we never make. Not the ones we regret, but the ones that almost happened. The choice you did not make, the path you did not take, the version of yourself that could have been but was not. What if every moment of indecision created a fracture in time? Imagine a division in the timeline. One in which you said yes instead of no. You stayed instead of leaving. You spoke instead of remaining silent. That other you, the one that made a different decision, keeps living in a silent parallel, oblivious to your current reality, and, nevertheless, pursuing it anyway. Because here is the paradox. The choice that you didn't make can mold you with the same force as the ones that you did. You didn't move to that city. You didn't say, I love you, when you should have. You didn't defend yourself. You didn't risk, and nevertheless, those non-choices whisper in your mind late at night like ghosts at the edge of your memory. Not entirely real, not entirely disappeared. You think about the job that you rejected, about the person that you almost became, about the phrase that you almost said, and that could have rewritten everything. We are told that our identity is defined by our actions. But what if part of who you are is also composed of absences, the doors that you closed before looking inside, the silence that substituted a scream? Sometimes the most crucial moments of our lives are those that we don't even realize while they are happening. The missed call, the day that you didn't go, the opportunity that presented itself and passed silently without fanfare, the thought that blinked and died before becoming a decision. In retrospect, they seem monumental, as if the universe was testing you and you didn't even know it. And nevertheless, here you are, reading this, breathing, living the life created by all those non-choices. That means something, but it also raises a question. If a choice that you didn't make keeps shaping your path, was it really a non-choice, or was that silence its own voice? Maybe what we don't choose reveals as much about us as what we choose, and that can be liberating or terrifying because sometimes we tell ourselves that we could have done it. We console ourselves with the idea that the door was always open, but we didn't cross it. But what if we couldn't? What if the choice was already made at the moment in which we realized it? Here is the silent horror of this paradox. The understanding that the person that you could have been is close enough to see, but always out of your reach. They're walking through a hallway that you have locked. You can imagine their thoughts, their relationships, their regrets. They feel real because in a certain way they are. And nevertheless, at the moment in which you made any decision, the other stopped being it. So what do we do with that, with the echo of choices that we never made? Perhaps we accept that not all paths were destined for us, that some versions of us were always destined not to be realized so that this version could exist. Perhaps the true power doesn't lie in obsessing over the choice that you didn't make, but in finally listening to what it taught you, because even silence has something to say. What happens when your mind is not thinking? It is a question that sounds simple until you really try to answer it. At first glance, the mind feels like a machine of thoughts, a river that never stops flowing from one idea to the next, from fear to another, from memory to another. But under that constant noise, what if there is something even stranger happening? A mind that exists even when it is not producing thoughts? Can you be conscious without thinking? Can there be awareness without the voice in your head? Imagine this. You're sitting in silence, without internal chatter, without comments, only stillness. And nevertheless, you are there. You haven't left. You're not asleep. You're fully present. The mind has not disappeared, but it is no longer thinking in the way that you're used to. This is the paradox. The mind doesn't need to think to exist, and sometimes thought can become an obstacle to true awareness. You are more than your thoughts, but that single idea can shatter you. Because if you're not the thinker, then who are you? Thoughts often seem like a proof of existence. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. But what if Descartes was wrong? What if the truest way of being is not found in thought, but in stillness? What if thought is only the surface, and your true self is what observes in silence from below? The paradox deepens when you realize that most of your thoughts are not even yours. They arise by themselves. You don't decide your next thought. It appears without you asking for it, often unwanted. Try to sit in silence for a few moments, and you will see that the mind thinks by itself. So who is really in control? Now, imagine the you that observes all this, the silent observer behind each word, behind each emotion, behind each worry. That version of you doesn't believe that it is a witness. It believes that it is the mind that is not thinking. And once you realize, even if it is for a second, something changes. You realize that the mind is not a machine that controls your life. It is a lens, and it can be focused or unfocused. It can be clouded by thoughts or crystalline with presence. But here's the twist. The more you pursue silence, the noisier your thoughts become. The more you try to force the mind to stop thinking, the more chaotic it becomes. The only way to glimpse the mind that is not thinking is to let go completely, without effort, without clinging, only with awareness, like a mirror that reflects everything but doesn't cling to anything. And in that state, something disturbing can appear. If the mind can exist without thoughts, what does that mean for your identity? You have spent your whole life building yourself from thoughts, stories, memories, beliefs. But in this strange silence, none of that remains. There's only space, emptiness, alive, aware. Are you still you, or are you something completely different? When the mind stops, some say that it is the closest we can be to the truth. A mind that doesn't think no longer distorts reality. It sees it directly, without judgments, without filters, without the constant need to narrate it. It doesn't solve your problems, it doesn't explain the universe, but it reminds you that thinking is not the same as being, and that the deepest parts of you exist far beyond words. So the next time your mind doesn't calm down, remember this paradox. Your truest self may be hiding in the silence between thoughts, the part of you that never needed to think at all. There's a smile that you don't use for others, but for yourself, a reflection, a mask, a small curve of the lips destined to convince you that everything is okay. But here's the strange part. Sometimes that smile appears even when your heart feels like it is falling apart, even when your thoughts are dark, your soul heavy, your body exhausted from pretending. That smile appears not out of joy, but out of habit. This is the paradox of the smile that lies to itself. It is a smile that is not born from happiness, but from survival, a signal to the world that you are okay, while a deeper part of you whispers in silence, I am not. And the strangest thing is that the only person that smile tries to deceive is yourself. We learn to smile through the pain. We are told to be positive, to fake it until we make it, to wear resilience like armor, and, over time, the line between pretending and believing blurs. You start to believe in your own expression. You look in the mirror and see someone who seems to be okay, but under that surface, your mind tells another story. The lie is not malicious. It is protective. It is the psyche trying to protect itself from the weight of its own sadness. But what happens when the mask becomes indistinguishable from the face? The paradox deepens because now you not only smile to deceive others, you smile to avoid facing yourself. That small familiar expression becomes a kind of hypnosis, a shield against introspection, against feeling too much. You tell yourself that you are okay until the truth becomes increasingly difficult to reach, and, nevertheless, that same smile can save you. There are tests in psychology showing that the simple act of smiling, whether truly or falsely, can deceive the brain so that it releases dopamine and serotonin. So maybe the lie helps. Maybe pretending for a while that you are well makes you a little better, but the danger lies in never taking off the mask, because if you wear the smile for too long, you start to lose track of what is real and what is acting. Have you ever been surprised, smiling in a moment of deep despair? And have you wondered why, where it has come from, and for whom it is? That is the disturbing beauty of this paradox. The smile that lies to itself does not need an audience. It acts for itself. It is an attempt by your own brain to rewrite reality, to offer a comforting illusion when the truth becomes unbearable. But illusions are fragile, and, in the end, the cracks appear, the smile becomes forced, the eyes stop following the game. The disconnection becomes undeniable, and at that moment, the question arises, if I can lie to myself with a smile, what else have I convinced myself of? What if entire parts of your personality are just emotional reflections that you have confused with the truth? That smile that before was comforting starts to torment you because it becomes a symbol not of strength, but of evasion. So what is the solution? It is not to stop smiling. It is to know when the smile is real, to recognize when it comes from a place of healing, and when it is hiding something that needs to be felt, because the truth is that you do not need to lie to yourself to survive. Sometimes the bravest thing that you can do is to frown, sit with the pain, let the mask fall, and when the true smile returns soft, effortless, genuine, you will know the difference. You will feel it not only in your face, but in the deepest part of your bones. The smile that lies to itself can be part of the journey, but it is not where the journey ends. Have you ever found yourself with a question so strange, so persistent, that it almost seemed alive? A question that not only seeks an answer, but that changes the shape of your mind while you wait for one. That is what this paradox explores. The question that not only comes from you, but turns around and starts to think about you. It starts subtly. You are sitting in silence, maybe lost in your thoughts, and a strange question floats into your consciousness. It is not about something external like mathematics, time, or the news. It is personal, invasive. It sounds like, am I really the one who is thinking this? At first, it seems like a moment of curiosity like any other, but then it repeats. It refuses to disappear, not to be resolved, but to be experienced. And over time, it stops seeming like a thought that you have had, and it becomes a presence that observes your thoughts. That is the paradox. You are the thinker, but suddenly you feel that you are the thought. It is a reversal of roles. The question does not passively wait for you to resolve it. It comes to life on its own. It goes into your consciousness and starts to change your perception of everything. It observes you from within. Not only do you ask it, but it asks you, what is this strange force? It could be compared to a mirror, but one that does not reflect your appearance, but your inner dialogue. Every time that you approach it with logic, it slides towards abstraction. Every time that you try to ignore it, it lights up in the moments of silence. It does not want to be answered. It wants to undo your sense of control. And that is what makes it so powerful, because most of us live under the illusion that we own our thoughts, that we are the source, the driver, the center of the current. But some questions like, what is thinking? Or, where was I before being aware of myself? Unravel. That certainty, and if you look too long at that unraveling, you start to realize that you are not having thoughts, but that the thoughts are having you. It is disorienting, even terrifying, but there is also a strange clarity in it, because it reveals how unstable what we believe we are is. Language gives us tools to navigate the world, but some questions destroy those tools. They do not want answers. They want surrender. They want you to admit that you really do not know who you are, that you have built an identity from remembered stories, voices that resonate inherited beliefs, and when that identity starts to crumble under the pressure of a question that you cannot silence, what remains is a kind of raw consciousness. The paradox here is not only the question in itself, but in what it turns you into: a witness, a listener, a space in which thought arises, but it no longer has a clear origin. And in that space, the limits blur between who asks and who is asked. So the next time that a question visits you in the stillness, do not try to conquer it. Try to feel it. Observe how it observes you, how it exposes your assumptions, how it remains, not to be resolved, but to be lived. Some questions do not lead to answers. Some questions are the answer, because when trying to understand them, you discover that what you are is not the thinker. You are the thought that is thought. There's a peculiar silence in the future, not the silence of peace, but of absence, not of tranquility, but of the eraser. Imagine entering a place that you were always destined to arrive at, only to discover that it no longer recognizes your existence. Neither footprints on the ground, nor whispers in the air, nor echoes of your name in the distant murmur of time. The future has arrived, but it has forgotten to bring you with it. They told you that your choices would carve the path forward, that your dreams, your struggle, your time would accumulate like sediments in layers forming the ground of what will come after. But what if the future does not remember the hands that built it? What if it is a hallway of doors that you never opened, temporal lines that you never touched, and lives that you never lived? You are on the threshold waiting for something that no longer waits for you. This is not regret. Regret supposes memory. This is dislocation. Being out of tune with what once was yours. You see technology molded by thoughts that you never had, societies moved by values that you never shared, and a world humming a language that you never spoke. You were part of the project, and now you are not even on the margins. Maybe the future did not forget about you maliciously. Maybe it has simply reorganized. A small fluctuation, a lost opportunity, a conversation that was never had, a decision that was delayed one day. Time is cruel in its sensitivity. 1,000 potential futures collapse for each second lived, and in one of them you are the protagonist. But in this one you are the late thought that never arrived. Worse still is the suspicion that they never remembered you in the first place, that history had a gap where you believed that your contribution was, that the narration advanced before you entered the scene. It is as if the script had a role written for you, but the ink had been erased before you could read it, and nevertheless, something strange stirs in this oblivion of freedom. If the future does not remember you, you are no longer obliged to fulfill its expectations. You are a ghost freed from the prophecy, a traveler who is no longer tied to the paths traced by others. When history forgets the character becomes author. When destiny dissolves, something raw and terrifying emerges. The choice without filtering by the promise. Still the pain remains, the silent pain of knowing that the world moved on without you, that the stars aligned for someone else, that your shadow never fell on the field that you once dreamed of harvesting. But then, what is more human than being out of place in time? What is more honest than being in a future that forgot your name and whispering it back to the void, because maybe forgetting is not the end, maybe it is the beginning of remembering yourself. You stumble upon it by accident, an unmarked door unguarded, ajar, hanging strangely on a wall that should not be there. It does not creak when you push it. It does not resist. It welcomes you as if it knew you, as if it had been waiting. But what is beyond is not the place that you left. It is not exactly the past, and it is not a dream either. It is a place that looks like your childhood room, but it smells like someone else's memories. The walls flicker between paint colors that you remember, and others that you do not. There's a book on the table that you would swear you have never read, but the pages are marked exactly where you would have left it. And a coat hanging on the hook, your old coat, but it does not fit you well, as if time had made it for a different version of you. This is the door that leads back, not back in time, not back to where you were, but back to yourself, to the questions that you avoided, to the void that you buried so deep that even your reflections forgot to look for it. It is not nostalgia. It is confrontation, because what receives you on the other side is not a replica of your past, but an unfinished thought, a version of you that continued growing in silence, in the shadows, while you continued forward, while you chose careers, relationships, identities, while you decided who to be. This other you never stopped wondering who you were, and now, standing in this strange, breathing memory, you begin to feel it, the weight of unanswered questions. Why did you choose that path? Why did you let that part of you die? Why did you leave when you knew that something sacred was asking you to stay? The door did not bring you back to a place. It brought you back to the moment when you walked away from yourself. You try to speak to justify yourself, but there is no one to answer, only shelves full with things you abandoned, Notebooks full of ideas you never pursued, letters you wrote but never sent, sketches of lives that were destined to be lived in silence. You reach out to touch them, but your hands pass through them. They are not memories. They are echoes, remains of unrealized selves. And that is when you realize that the door never opened outwards. It was always waiting inwards. Every time you felt a pang of loss for no apparent reason, every time you were in a room full of people and still felt lost, every dream you woke up from haunted you, not for what happened, but for what never happened. The door was always there, but you were not ready to go back in. And yet, here you are, not to fix anything, not to reclaim what was lost, but to recognize that it was real, that you were real, that the pieces you left behind still matter, even if they never became anything more than a question. You don't need to relive the pain. You just need to witness when you go through the door again. Nothing has changed outside. The world keeps moving forward, oblivious, but something inside you changes. You're no longer just the path that you followed. You're also the rooms that you once closed, the thoughts that you never answered, the beings that you once were brave enough to imagine. The door continues there, behind you. Maybe it always will be, maybe it's not a door at all, but a mirror disguised as an invitation, a return not to where you were, but to who you could have been. Starts in silence, a single thought, nothing dramatic, just a flash in the static, a whisper between flickering lights. Maybe it arises during a conversation or while you brush your teeth, or just before sleep envelopes your consciousness. It seems harmless at first, even forgettable, but it persists, and then repeats. You try to dismiss it. You tell yourself it's nothing, a mental echo, a loose wire, but the thought is patient. It does not demand your attention. It waits for the silence, and the moment when the world arrives, there it is, unchanged, uninvited, unresolved. It does not scream. It repeats the thought that does not go away. It is not strong. It is persistent, and its persistence begins to alter things. You change the way you think around it. You build walls of distraction, meaningless conversations. You keep your mind busy because you know that the moment you stop, it comes back, a silent presence behind your eyes, gently tapping the inside of your skull as if asking, "Do you remember?" It could be a question you never answered, a truth you never faced, a fear you refused to name. It may not even make sense to you anymore, but sense is not what matters. What matters is the weight, and this thought weighs. The strange thing is how something so small begins to shape your entire mental landscape. It's like a grain of sand in your shoe. It shouldn't matter, but every step reminds you that it is there. You change the way you walk, your posture, your route, and soon your whole journey becomes an answer to something so small, but so inescapably present that people around you may not notice it, but you do. You feel the way you stop before speaking, censoring yourself unconsciously. You perceive the strange gap between your laughter and your thoughts. You know that you have begun to measure time by the distance between distractions, anything to postpone the next return of that same relentless idea. But what if the thought is not a parasite? What if it is a sign, a truth you are not prepared for, disguised as irritation, a lesson wrapped in discomfort? What if this thought keeps coming back because it never really left you, and now it has found its way home, gently, insistently, knocking on the door of your denial? You consider listening, not because you are ready, but because you are tired of going around without looking, of avoiding something so familiar that it already lives in your reflection. So one day, without ceremony, you stop running, you sit down, and let the thought speak. It does not scream. It never needed to. It simply unfolds slowly, painfully, bringing with it memories that you buried in metaphors, feelings that you eliminated from your story, choices that you disguise as accidents. It unearths the version of you that still waits to be seen, not judged, not fixed, just recognized. And in that moment, something unexpected happens. The thought softens. It is no longer a loop. It is a mirror, and mirrors do not hurt. They reflect what you feared was an intruder, but that was actually a fragment of you that refused to erase the thought that does not disappear, that maybe never goes away. But that does not have to haunt you, because once you have faced it, once you have listened to it, it transforms from a whisper in the darkness into a compass, from a weight into a witness. It is no longer the enemy. It is the part of you that remembered when you tried to forget there is someone who walks right next to your life. He does not speak. He does not interfere, but he follows you closely. You feel his presence sometimes like the shadow of a déjà vu, a look in the mirror that does not fully reflect who you are, a voice in your head that seems almost your own, but not quite. You cannot name them, but they know your name. They know your habits, your hesitations, your desires. They know the decisions you did not make, the paths you did not take, the lives you did not live. This is the stranger you almost became, not a fictitious self, not a distant what if, but a real version created from moments you ignored, instinct you silenced, doors you did not open. They were born in seconds, in glances, in all the moments of silence in which you said no to yourself, or, worse still, maybe later. They live not in your past, but in the dimension that almost was, and they haunt you not with malice, but with familiarity. Sometimes they appear when you least expect it, in the way you look too long at someone doing something you wish you had dared to do, in the way certain music seems to belong to a life you have never lived, in dreams in which you wake up with the confidence or the pain or the joy of another person, and it is so real that waking up is like a loss. This stranger, this unlived version of you, is not angry. He is patient. He walks parallel to your decisions, echoing in silence. It could have been different, not better or worse, just different, and this is not regret, it is recognition. You almost became them, and they almost became you. Think of the moment you hesitated on the edge of a new beginning, the time you swallowed your truth to keep the peace, the way you molded yourself to fit in, to be liked, to be safe. Each of those moments wove a thread, and while your current self continued weaving forward, that thread separated and continued weaving as well, only in another direction. Now imagine all those threads forming a figure made of lost opportunities and repressed truths, a figure with your eyes, but with someone else's fire, a version of you that does not wait for permission, that does not overthink, that does not shrink. They are not better than you, but they have no burdens. They do not have the burdens of the mask you have learned to wear. They do not have the comfort of compromises. They have made different sacrifices. They have faced different storms, and yet, in some fundamental aspect, they are still you, built from your essence, only directed elsewhere. And then here comes the strangest thing. You are also a stranger to them. Sometimes they wonder what it would have been like to have your calm, your caution, your depth. They imagine the warmth you retained by not chasing the fire, the relationships they maintained, the stability they built. For them, you are the path not taken, and in some quiet place in their mind, they long for the life you created. So maybe the stranger is not a ghost, nor a warning, nor a mistake. Maybe they are simply a reminder that you are not one self, but many, that your identity is not fixed, but fluid, that even now a new version of you waits in the wings, whispering through the hesitation. Try again. That it is never too late to become the stranger you almost became, and that the next time you pass by a mirror, you look closely at that flash of something unsaid in your eyes. Those are them. That is you, not lost, not gone, just waiting to be chosen again. And if you listen carefully, they keep walking by your side. It is not the fear of death. Death is something you can name, describe, even ritualize. You can prepare for it, philosophize about it, deny it, or even make peace with it. But what lies beneath is not death itself. It is non-existence, the idea that one day the light simply goes out and there is nothing left to remember that it ever shone. It is not only that your body stops working or that your heart stops beating. It is about you, about your thoughts, about your memories, about your consciousness ceasing to exist, not about sleeping nor about dreaming, nor about floating in some ethereal realm, simply erased as if you had never existed. This fear has no form, teeth, or screams. It is more silent than silence. It sneaks not through horror, but through stillness, a moment alone at night, a sudden and suffocating thought while you scrub dishes, a blank space in your mind that swallows your attention with a question. What if I never existed to even ask it? Your name will be forgotten, your memories scattered like ash, every inside joke, every caress, every pain, every joy will disappear without anyone left to remember that they ever happened. The world will move on. People will continue breathing, eating, arguing, dreaming without any trace of your footprint in their sky, and slowly, surely, the wave that you will dissolve in a calm pond. That is the real fear, isn't it? Not that life ends, but that it may have meant nothing. We build monuments to our existence, photos, stories, digital profiles. We speak, we share, we act. We leave footprints in the hope that something, anything, remains, that someone remembers, that our lives resonate long enough to overcome the silence. But deep down we know that silence is infinite, and we are not. So what do we do with this fear? How do we move through life knowing that everything we love, everything we are, can be devoured one day by the void without leaving even an echo? Some deny it. They distract themselves with routine, noise, ambition. Others spiritualize it, believing that consciousness transcends the body, that something eternal observes from behind the veil. Some find meaning in creation, turning to art, ideas, children, hoping that those things will outlive them and pronounce their names when they can no longer do so. But whatever we create, the fear always returns. It does not knock on the door. It sneaks into those silent spaces between breaths, and the way we cling to life too tightly or let it slip through our fingers. In the pain we feel when we look at the stars and realize that they have been burning for billions of years without even knowing that we are here. But maybe fear is not a defect. Maybe it is a compass, because fearing not existing means that you care that you exist. It means that you recognize how rare, how precious it is to be conscious in this vast and cold universe. It means that in a reality where non-existence is the norm, your simple act of being is already an act of rebellion, a spark in the void, a phrase in the silence. So yes, the fear remains, but maybe that fear is not there to paralyze you. Maybe it is there to wake you up, to remind you that in this fleeting moment in which the universe looks through your eyes, you are real, you are here, and maybe that is enough. There is a light that reveals nothing, does not warm skin or drive away darkness, does not create contrasts, does not draw the world in silhouettes. It simply exists, pure, perfect, and indifferent. No shadow follows it, because nothing resists it, and in this strange illumination the world becomes disturbingly flat. Everything is seen, but nothing is understood. This is the light that casts no shadows. A paradox of clarity without meaning, visibility without truth. We are taught to seek light, to find answers. Understand the purpose. We chase knowledge like moths spiraling toward the flame, and when we find it, we assume that the world will finally make sense, that pain will dissolve into reason, that questions will collapse into certainty, that with enough light we will see everything. But what happens when we reach that light and nothing changes? What happens when the room is completely lit and you still don't know where you are? You look at the walls, you see every detail, the cracks, the grains of the wood, the dust in the corners, and you still feel lost, not because things are hidden, but because they have no weight. It is as if the light itself has erased the need for shadow, and, in doing so, erased the soul of the room. Truth, when stripped of mystery, can become sterile. There's a part of you that needs the unknown to feel alive. The shadow gives depth. The darkness makes light sacred. Without contrast, there is no tension, no beauty, no choice, just a blank world, infinitely visible, forever without challenge. Imagine a world in which every emotion is explained, every behavior mapped, every spiritual longing reduced to circuits and chemistry. Imagine a future in which consciousness is decoded, dreams cataloged, and love is just dopamine dancing in predictable rhythms. Would you feel enlightened or empty? This is the trap of the light that casts no shadows. It promises illumination, but at the cost of wonder. It offers answers, but kills the one who asks. It exposes everything, but makes you feel invisible. And yet we keep moving towards it because we're afraid of the darkness, afraid of what is hidden there, afraid that the unknown will hurt us, destroy us, reveal some truth that we cannot bear. But the truth is that sometimes it is the absence of shadows that is most terrifying, Sometimes it is the brightness that blinds us, a light that reveals everything offers no refuge, no quiet corner for pain, no sacred space for uncertainty. It burns without pause. And you begin to fade into its glow, crushed, emptied, named before you can even speak. You become a character in someone else's clarity. But here is a secret. Real light does cast shadows. True illumination does not erase mystery. It deepens it. It does not demand that you see everything. It teaches you to look, to feel, to ask. And in doing so, it brings you closer to the living pulse of things. The kind of light that matters most is the one that reveals just enough so you can take the next step and leaves the rest in sacred darkness. So be careful with the light that casts no shadows. It may seem true, but it lacks meaning. It may offer vision, but not insight. And it may let you see everything except yourself. There's a version of you that never stopped drawing, one that did not abandon the piano, one that confessed that feeling, one that turned left instead of right. Somewhere in the dust behind every decision you made lies an untouched life that still breathes, that still looks, that still waits. We talk about regret as if it were something to be healed, but regret is not just about the decisions made. It is about paths not taken, lives not lived, beings not born. It is the subtle pain for the you that almost existed, and sometimes that pain whispers louder than memory. You feel it in moments of silence, in dreams that make no sense but that are strangely familiar, in the sudden pain of an old song that was never your favorite, in places you have never been but that somehow seem familiar. That is the ghost of a life you did not live. We like to imagine that we are the sum of our decisions, but what if we are all so obsessed with the sum of our non-decisions? Every moment in which you hesitated, every fear that held you back, every maybe later that became never, did not disappear. They huddled in silent corners of your mind and watch how your life unfolded from the background, and maybe they are still there, not as failures, but as echoes. You could have married someone else, lived in another city, spoken another language, breathed under other skies, and although this life in which you are is the only one you can touch, it is not the only one you feel. Some people call it multiverse, others imagination, but regardless of the name, the pain remains. There's a version of you that almost was, and they're so close that sometimes you can hear their heartbeats in your silence. This life, your life, is not erroneous, but it is partial, because each election is also a closure. Each taken path means 1,000 others that are left behind. And in those hidden lives, things happen that you will never know. You lost meetings that never happened. You avoided a pain that never had to heal. You also missed joys that could have shattered you in ways you cannot imagine. But here is the twist. The fact that you have not lived those lives does not mean that they have not shaped you. You carry their weight, their flavor, their residue. You are not a single thread, but a tapestry of almost. And somewhere inside you, the painter keeps painting, the dancer keeps dancing, the rebel keeps rebelling. The lover still risks everything. They never abandoned you. They became you. So the next time you feel the sting of the roads not taken, do not rush to bury it with logic or guilt. Let it hurt. Let it speak, because that pain is not your enemy. It is your reminder that you are immense, that the possible never really dies, that somewhere inside you 1,000 versions of yourself still breathe, and maybe, just maybe, it is not too late to become one of them. There's a kind of truth that, once spoken, unravels like a candle that burns its own wick, or a name that fades the moment it is said aloud. You look for it thinking that it will solidify the world, that it will clarify things, that it will end the chaos, but instead it collapses like fog, leaving you with even more questions than before. This is the truth that cancels itself. At the beginning, it seems like a revelation. You feel that sharp click in the mind, as if a piece of a puzzle has just fit into place. Everything aligns, the past is rewritten, the future becomes readable. You finally understand what was hidden all the time, but then something strange happens. That same truth, once solid, begins to falter. It does not hold. It collapses on itself. Not because it was false, but for being too true, so absolute that it swallows the context that it intended to explain. It is like seeing the edge of a map, and realizing that the map was never the territory, or discovering that the answer to a riddle is another riddle in turn. You start to suspect something terrifying, that some truths are recursive. They refer to themselves without end. The more you understand, the more you realize what understanding is not really. The mere act of understanding the truth snatches it from your hands, like trying to define consciousness by dissecting the mind, like explaining love using only logic. You may get closer. You may build a precious model, but the thing itself, the essence, escapes you. It is not because you are failing. It is because the truth is designed to undo your certainties. Think of the paradoxes with which we have lived for centuries now. This statement is false. Know thyself. I only know that I know nothing at all. They are not riddles to be solved. They are mirrors. And when you look at them for too long, you do not find the answer. You find yourself unraveling, and maybe that is the point. Maybe some truths exist not to be retained, but to be witnessed, to bend the mind, stretch it, break. It's craving for finality, because the deepest truths are not comforting. They do not resolve. They disorient. They make you humble. They remind you that the universe was never designed to fit in a sentence. So, what do? With a truth that cancels itself? Do you discard it as nonsense? Or do you sit with it like a koan that refuses resolution? Perhaps the goal is not clarity, but rather transformation. Perhaps the value of these truths is that they destroy your need for clean answers, and in the rubble of your certainty, something softer arises, a kind of wisdom that does not speak in absolutes. See that it does not need to name a truth that is felt more than it is known. One that leaves room for silence, for paradox, for mystery, because in the end, maybe the truth is not something you arrive at. Maybe it is something you become in the space between knowing and not knowing. And when you finally stop trying to force it into words, it no longer cancels itself. It simply is there's a version of you that never left the room, not physically, but in a deeper and stranger way. When you left, when you moved on, when you made peace or fled, something stayed. It is still there in that conversation that you never finished, that moment that you could not explain, that room where everything changed, or maybe it did not. It remains like dust in a corner. You stop noticing. But observe, remember. This is the version that stayed behind there. We carry the idea that we are always moving forward, always growing, always becoming more of ourselves. But time does not move in a straight line. Memory does not age. Emotions do not obey the clock. And sometimes neither do we. You may have left a place, you may have turned the page, but a part of you, subtle, invisible, never did. Maybe it is still waiting for closure. Maybe it is still trying to explain itself. Maybe it is just sitting there in silence, refusing to move until someone notices it. You feel it sometimes when you revisit old places, your childhood home, a hospital room, the chair at the edge of someone's bed. Even if the furniture is no longer there, the feeling is not yours. You feel like you become that version again, as if time folds on itself, and the past is not behind you, but right next to you. That version remembers things you have forgotten. It hurts in places you have numbed. It still believes in things you stopped saying out loud. And when life feels fractured, when you do not recognize the person in the mirror, it is often because you left without all of you, and now the past pulls your sleeve, not to punish you, but to remind you that that unresolved version is not a ghost. It is not your enemy. It is not weakness. It is simply unfinished. And unfinished does not mean broken. It just means waiting for you to return, not to stay, but to recognize, to say, I remember, to say you mattered, to say I could not take you all with me, but I never wanted to leave you behind. This version does not want to control. It does not want to rewrite your life. It just wants to be seen completely, without shame, without haste, without trying to turn pain into wisdom or wrap it all in a quote that you will forget tomorrow. It wants to be allowed to exist. So, music, pause, close your eyes and visit that room again. Not physically, but in the silent theater of your mind, enter. Look at yourself sitting there and, for once, do not ask them to move. Do not explain to them the progress you have made or how much better things are now. Just sit, just be, just feel, and maybe in that stillness, that version can finally get up, not to follow you, not to merge with you, but to nod and say thank you for coming back. Then you will know that healing is not always about moving forward. Sometimes healing is about returning to the parts of yourself that waited a long time after you left. And when you finally leave again, it will be together. There is something disturbing about the idea of being watched, especially by something that only opens when you close your eyes. Imagine a room without windows, without doors, without sound, just stillness. You're sitting in the center, alone, with the beating of your heart as the only rhythm in the silence. But you feel something is watching you. You blink, and that is when it opens. This is the paradox, an eye that only sees when you do, not an observer who is only awake when you're not when you sleep. No, it is not that simple. It is activated when you momentarily lower your guard, even for a second, when your eyelids close, when the world disappears for a simple blink. That is when it observes. How do you prove that you are being observed? By something that only exists when you cannot see it. The eye that watches you blink does not reside in the realm of the ordinary. It is a metaphor, and possibly something more. It could be the embodiment of self-awareness, the part of your mind that only sees itself when you do not consciously try. Or maybe it is external, an echo of the observer effect, the quantum strangeness that suggests that observation alters reality. In this case, non-observation invites a type of deeper vision. You will wonder what it sees, not your appearance, not your gestures. It sees your intentions, your unconscious truths, the secrets that you do not hide from others, but from yourself. Observe how your body moves when your mind tries to lie now. See the flash of fear before courage intervenes then. It witnesses your true self and records every blink, every moment of blindness. It is like a frame from a movie that you're not directing. It compiles its own version of you, an invisible biography written in the dark. And when you open your eyes again, it is already gone, leaving you knowing nothing, but subtly shaped by what it saw. Think about how many times you have blinked today. Thousands. How many moments have been stolen from your consciousness? How much could an intelligent, timeless, and tireless I learn from those fragments? The paradox deepens when you try to face it. You look at yourself in the mirror, forcing your eyes to remain open, challenging it to appear, but you will never catch it in action. Just as you cannot see yourself blink, it is always a frame too late, a thought too soon, like trying to catch a shadow in broad daylight. And still you feel it, not necessarily with fear, but with that silent and tickling intuition that something knows you better than you do yourself, an invisible gaze that exists between your perceptions, does not chase you or catch you, waits, patient and silent, observing. Maybe it is your conscience, maybe it is memory, maybe it is something older, a force embedded in reality, designed to watch over the blind spots of sensitive beings. But ask yourself this: what if it is watching you now? You blink, and you see one in the corner of a long-forgotten room. Dust dances in a ray of sunlight. It seems meaningless, random, lifeless. But what if I told you that inside each floating speck there is a memory that is not yours or mine, but a fragment of time itself? That is the heart of this paradox. Memory hidden in dust. Dust is the residue of everything that was: skin cells, shattered stone, faded paper, fallen stars. Each speck that lands on a surface carries with it the story, even if we no longer recognize it. The paradox asks, if memory is not only in the mind, but in matter, where does it end? Think of an abandoned library, the shelves covered in cobwebs, the books sealed by time. You walk among them, shaking the dust off a table. That layer is more than abandonment. It is a record. It remembers the warmth of the sunlight that once fell on it, the fingertips that touched it, the breath that remained on it. The dust is not only what remains, it is what we were. We assume that memory requires consciousness, a brain, neurons, synapses, but what if the universe has its own form of memory? What if dust is your filing system, silent, slow, infinite? Scientists have long studied how objects retain traces: a fingerprint on glass, a footprint in the sand, radiation in fossils. But what if even more is preserved? What if memory is embedded at the atomic level, and each particle carries a faint echo of what it once witnessed? A particle of dust on your desk may have once floated on a battlefield. Another may have adhered to the tunic of a monk 1,000 years ago. You will never know, but she does know. The paradox becomes more acute when we introduce the idea of forgotten knowledge, civilizations lost in time, erased languages, burned cultures. Where did that knowledge go? If memory really fades, it is gone forever. But if it is hidden in the dust, in the relics, in the spaces we ignore, then it is simply waiting to be discovered, or perhaps waiting to return. There's a kind of sacred stillness in ancient places, not only because of antiquity, but because of the density, the accumulation of presence. You're not simply standing in a room, you're standing in layers of time. Each inch carries the impressions of those who came before, their steps, their breath, their pain, their laughter, now dissolved but somehow suspended in the air. You cannot touch these memories directly, but sometimes when the light hits in the right way, when the dust swirls slow and golden, you feel as if something is speaking to you, not with words, but in the atmosphere, in the weight, in the resonance. You feel it, a moment that is not yours, but that still remembers you. And perhaps that is the ultimate twist. The dust remembers you too. Your presence becomes another whisper in its vast, silent library. When you leave, it will settle again. Your breath, your warmth, your energy join the millions of forgotten fragments, gently enveloping you in the long continuum of memory. So the next time you clean a surface, stop for a moment. Don't just see the dirt you're erasing, the story, or maybe waking it up. Have you ever had a thought and wondered where it came from? Maybe it was strange, maybe it was beautiful, or maybe it was dark, so alien that it didn't even seem yours. That is where this paradox begins, the thought you didn't think. We like to believe that we control our minds, that every idea, every intention, every whisper in our brain is a product of our own. But if that is true, why do thoughts sometimes appear out of nowhere? Why do we imagine things we never wanted to? Why are we surprised by our own mind? This paradox challenges the very foundations of identity. If a thought arises without your will, without your awareness, without even your permission, did you really think it? This is where it gets deeper. Let's say you're walking down a street and suddenly you think something absurd, like jumping into a fountain or shouting a random word that you didn't plan to think. It just appeared. Scientists call this an intrusive thought, but here is the twist. Intrusive or not, the thought is yours. Your brain created it. But if your brain can generate ideas without your consent, then who is really in control? It's like finding a note on your desk, in your own handwriting, but you don't remember writing it. It's familiar and strange at the same time. Now imagine this happens every second. Thousands of micro thoughts arise, flash and fade, most without your conscious mind realizing it. Most of your thinking could be happening without you. This leads us to a disturbing but fascinating question. Are you the thinker or the observer? Perhaps your mind is more like a garden where thoughts grow like wildflowers, some cultivated, others simply appear scattered by the wind that you do not understand. Perhaps the act of thinking is not about creating, but about selecting. You don't invent all the thoughts. You only notice the ones that matter. And what about the thoughts that seem completely alien, like a dream that is not yours, like a voice that does not belong? Could it be a glitch, a hidden memory, a sign from a part of your mind that exists beyond your conscious self? Or, and here is the disturbing possibility, could it be a different version of yourself thinking it, a parallel you, a past you, a potential you? Sometimes we filter out those strange thoughts, we discard them, we bury them. But the paradox reminds us that even the thoughts we disown come from somewhere within us. So perhaps the thought you didn't think is actually the most honest, the one that hasn't been edited by fear nor touched by the ego, a raw fragment of your deepest self that breaks the surface just a second before diving back into the darkness. You didn't think it, but maybe it revealed you, and that changes everything. Every story we know, every journey, every life has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but what if the end was just the beginning in disguise? Welcome to the paradox of the end that starts again. It begins, logically, with endings. Endings seem definitive, a full stop, a call to the curtain. But look closer and you will see that endings are never really alone. Every time something ends, something else begins. A breakup ends a relationship and begins a new sense of identity. A death ends a life and begins the pain, the memory, or even the belief in what is beyond. Even the universe plays this trick. Scientists believe that the cosmos may not expand forever. It could collapse and restart in a cycle called the Big Bounce. If true, the end of this universe could be the beginning of another. But let's get closer. Imagine you're reading the last page of a book. The words come to an end. You close the cover, but in that act, as your fingers press the back of the book, something new begins. A reflection, a decision, perhaps even the urge to reread it or pass it on to someone else. The paradox is this: an ending is never an ending in isolation. It creates what comes next. Now, think about time. We imagine time as a line that moves forward, but what if it were a loop? What if the moment you reach the end, you start again, not by chance, but because it has to happen? This idea resonates in the dreams of those who try to escape. You arrive at the edge, but it takes you back to the beginning again and again, like a circle that hides its own shape, and perhaps it is also life, a spiral, not a straight path. Each ending leads to a new version of the same story, evolved, rewritten, but with the same patterns. In philosophy, this idea touches reincarnation, karma, legacy, even the concept that your repeated choices endlessly define not only your life, but your eternity. It also challenges how we define finality. If everything continues, even in an altered way, does anything really finish? Here comes the disturbing part. You may not even notice the hidden beginning in your ending. It could be subtle, a look, a silence, a choice. You believe that you have reached the goal, but in reality, you have opened a door. The room may seem familiar, but it is not the same. Perhaps that is why we fear endings. Not because they are empty, but because they are full of potential, of the unpredictable. Unwritten, so when something ends, a phase, a connection, a belief, do not look for the closure, look for the spark, because the paradox whispers that nothing ends, only changes. Each ending is a new beginning, and this cycle could be the most eternal truth of all. So we come to the end, the last note, the last frame, the conclusion. But what is a conclusion? Is it a moment of peace or a silent lie that we tell ourselves to stop asking questions? Welcome to the paradox of conclusion. We pursue conclusions everywhere, in stories, in science, in philosophy. We long for them because they make us feel safe, definitive, clean, like the last piece of puzzle that finally fits into place. But conclusions are rarely what they seem. In science, a conclusion is often just a starting point for more questions. The moment you think you have found the truth, it changes, expands, or contradicts itself. What was once solid becomes fluid. The atom was indivisible. The earth was flat. Each conclusion we had turned out to be a stepping stone to something more complex. Conclusions never come alone. Graduation is not the end. It is the beginning of responsibility. Retirement is not a conclusion, but a redefinition of purpose. Even death, the ultimate end, is not always seen as an end. In beliefs and legacy, in memory, it endures, resonates, inspires. So perhaps the paradox is this: a conclusion is never really conclusive. It only seems definitive because we decide to stop looking beyond it. Now, think about stories. How many books end with a twist that reopens the narrative? How many movies leave you wondering what really happened? And how many moments in your own life have you labeled as the end only to realize later that they were disguised transitions? Here is a deeper layer. What if the conclusion is a mirror, not a destination, but a reflection that shows you where you have been, but never quite where you are going? It gives the illusion of closure while quietly preparing the next act. Even language betrays this idea. The word conclusion comes from the Latin concludere, which means to silence, to enclose, or to confine. But can you really confine thoughts, curiosity, or existence? Some philosophers argue that true conclusions do not exist, only pauses, moments in which we agree to rest before resuming the endless cycle of searching, doubting, and rediscovering. So here is the hidden truth in plain sight. There is no last word, not even this right now. What seems like the end of the paradoxical journey is just a space between thoughts, a breath before the next question. The loop does not close. It continues silently in your mind, because the conclusion is not the last line. It is the pause before turning the page. Generated with https://comai.